Campaign Battle of Gettysburg. Probably everybody knows the gentleman on the right, Robert E. Lee. The gentleman on the left is George Gordon Meade. He was also known as a goggly-eyed old snapping turtle. That's what many of his subordinate officers refer to him as, certainly not to his face. Why did things happen in Gettysburg? Well, we'll go over a few of these things. Many of them are from a Confederate perspective. Why the Army of Northern Virginia, Robert E. Lee's army in the East, ended up on Northern soil. One was a push for European recognition. There was a perception throughout the South that the economies of Europe were so dependent on Southern cotton that Europe would intervene on their behalf so that the Union blockade that was preventing Southern cotton from reaching their ports would be lessened, would go away, and the South would have its own country. So Lee felt, and actually lobbied Jefferson Davis for permission to move into the North, was that although they had had numerous successes, they had all been on Southern soil. However, they knew that if they could launch an offensive into the North, defeat the Union Army in the East, many military experts would advocate that this Southern Confederacy has shown that they have what it takes to be a country on their own. They could actually invade another country and be successful. So that was a big reason why Gettysburg came to be. Relief of Vicksburg, Mississippi. Simultaneously with the Gettysburg campaign, Vicksburg, Mississippi was under siege by another Union army commanded by somebody named Ulysses S. Grant. It had been under siege for a couple of months. The importance of Vicksburg on the Mississippi River, at that particular time, it was the only Confederate stronghold left on the Mississippi. The Union had control of the rest of the Mississippi River, which basically split the Confederacy in half. And it would have been catastrophic for the Southern cause for the Union to have free shipping up and down the Mississippi River where they could move troops, materiel, and other supplies of war. Another reason Robert E. Lee wanted to go into Pennsylvania was to give the farmers in the Shenandoah Valley an opportunity to harvest crops that they had planted that spring. Additionally, the Shenandoah Valley was one of the breadbaskets of the South. Lee knew that if he could move his army of approximately 65,000 men into the north, they could live off of northern resources, and there would be that much food and material available for the rest of the South. The Southern armies operating in the west meaning the Trans-Mississippi, Louisiana area, and the citizens in the South. There was tremendous shortages of food going out through the South at this time. If his army is in the north, that's 65,000 mouths and probably about 18,000 horses and mules that don't have to be fed with Southern stores. And he also realized that if he could seek a decisive engagement, one that would work out for the South, a victory for the South, that folks in the North who have already seen catastrophic numbers and unbelievable casualties thus far would say, it's just not worth it anymore, let them go. So that's how that helps to explain why the Army of Northern Virginia moved into Pennsylvania. Let's talk about the timeline. On May 1st through the 4th, there was a battle outside of Fredericksburg, Virginia, in Chancellorsville. The Union Army, the Army of the Potomac, was commanded by Fighting Joe Hooker. Joe Hooker gave himself that name. It wasn't because of his great service, but he was defeated, a serious defeat. And also during that battle, Stonewall Jackson was shot and severely wounded by his own men, and succumbed to actually pneumonia about 10 days afterwards. After Chancellorsville, and after he got permission from Jefferson Davis, Lee set out with actually 75,000 men, my apologies, 75,000 men towards the north. On June 16th, Lee's advance units enter Maryland. They cross over the Potomac into Maryland, a northern state. On the 23rd, Confederate cavalry, everybody's probably heard of Jeb Stuart, James Brown Stuart, begins his second ride around the enemy. The reason that's in caps, in 1862, Jeb Stuart and a cavalry division of about 9,000 horsemen completely rode around the Army of the Potomac on the peninsula of Virginia, down around the James River. And it created quite a stir. A lot of embarrassment for the Union officers. And one of those Union officers that he actually made look really bad was his father-in-law. On June 24th, Lee's entire army has crossed the Potomac west of Harper's Ferry into Maryland. And on June 27th, Hooker sends a telegram to Abraham Lincoln resigning his command. Hooker had done everything he could to move the Army of the Potomac to shadow Lee, to keep his army interspersed between Lee and either Washington, D.C. or Baltimore. Hooker was screaming for reinforcements. There was a 10,000-man Union garrison at Harper's Ferry. Hooker had implored Lincoln to release those troops so that he could take them under his command to reinforce them. Lincoln had refused. So on the 27th, he offered his resignation. Now the next date I have is June 29th, but can anybody tell me what they think may have happened on June 28th, 153 years ago today? On June 28th, at approximately 3 a.m., George Lee, the googly-eyed old snapping turtle, 3 a.m., was awakened in his tent. He was commanding the Union Army, the Army of the Potomac's 5th Corps at the time. At 3 a.m., a courier arrives at his tent just outside of Frederick, Maryland, and awakens him. Meade is convinced that the courier has arrived with orders to place him under arrest. Now, that was a 19th century military term for if an officer was being charged with dereliction of duty or whatever, you're placed under arrest. That's what Meade expected. Instead, he found orders for him to take command of the entire army, knowing that Robert E. Lee was already on northern soil, and there was going to be a complete change of command at the top of the Union Army. Meade, in a letter to his wife, later said it was the darkest day of my life. But he accepted the command. By June 29th, these cities, including New York, were in a panic. They were convinced that Robert E. Lee would march unvexed and seize control of these cities. As a matter of fact, just as the day before Lee issued orders for his army to consolidate near Gettysburg, fully one-third of his army was right across the river from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. If Lee's order had been delayed by 1 day, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the capital of the Commonwealth, would have fallen into Confederate hands, would have been captured. And it was a huge railroad depot, huge stores, ammunition, everything was available there. On June 30th, A.P. Hill, Ambrose Powell Hill, his corps, an infantry brigade, marches in from the west, from Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, towards Gettysburg. Two advanced elements of George Meade's army, John Buford's cavalry division, 2 brigades of that division entered Gettysburg. Buford was known at the time as a very forward-thinking cavalry commander. Great things could have come from John Buford, a 36-year-old Ohioan, had he not died of typhoid fever in November of 1863. But he told his officers, "You will have to fight like the devil until support arrives." He knew what the Union Army was facing and what George Meade was facing, having taken command just a few days earlier before arguably the largest and most decisive battle of the Civil War. This is a little overview of what we refer to as the Eastern Theater of the American Civil War. And you'll notice when I spoke earlier of the Battle of Chancellorsville, there's Fredericksburg, Virginia, right there. That's the Rappahannock River. Battle of Chancellorsville occurred right about there. This is the starting point for the armies. And you'll notice the Confederate forces are in red, and they marched across the Potomac River, west of Harper's Ferry, across Maryland, through Hagerstown, and towards Gettysburg, 1 corps. Remember I mentioned that they were 1 day away from taking Harrisburg? Richard Ewell's corps, whose name you will hear later. There's Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, right there. That's how close they got. Other elements of Lee's army got as far as the Susquehanna River there. So maybe at the time there certainly was legitimacy for the concerns of the folks in Philadelphia and possibly New York. Certainly the people in Harrisburg experienced it. That ride around the Union Army by Jeb Stuart, that's the red dotted line here. Well, that's a circuitous route to get to Gettysburg, isn't it? And keep in mind, although we will not be discussing it tomorrow, but it's important to note that during that entire ride of Jeb Stuart's cavalry division, he was incommunicado with Robert E. Lee. And at the time, one of the primary functions of cavalry was to provide intelligence to your commander on the position and strength of the enemy forces facing you. And for that entire period, that level of intelligence that Lee was expecting, he never received. Stuart actually arrived in Gettysburg on July 2nd, well into the battle. Now let's focus down a little bit. Now, although this image shows the battle lines on the third day, it will give you a closer view of how things played out in Gettysburg. Here's the town right here. Now, down to the south, probably right about here, is Emmitsburg, where we are. We're about 11 miles. We're about 11 miles from the center of town. Where we will be visiting tomorrow, among other places, is Little Round Top and the wheat field, and a little place known as the High Water Mark. Those are some of the places we will visit tomorrow. But as you can see, Lee's forces are on the perimeter. George Meade has assumed a defensive position in Gettysburg. These areas, Little Round Top and Round Top, Big Round Top, those are rocky prominences, certainly not as high as the hills and mountains of the range, but they certainly, from a military standpoint, are quite defensible. This entire blue line here runs along an area called Cemetery Ridge, Cemetery Hill, and Culp's Hill. Meade assumed a defensive stance, and much of the decisions that he made were actually based on plans of battle, devised and designed by Joe Hooker. Frankly, having assumed command on June 28th, with the battle starting on July 1 and then going on until the 3rd, there truly was no time for Meade to conceive his own battle plans. So he basically executed the plan that was in place by Joe Hooker. He certainly made the decision to stay and fight, and made these positions and counted on his subordinates and their advice for him to choose to stay. But Meade basically fought not only with Joe Hooker's army, but with Joe Hooker's plan. Something that will help you out a little bit in understanding. An army is composed of different corps. The Confederate Army had 3. After the death of Stonewall Jackson, prior to Jackson's death, there was 2 corps in the Army of Northern Virginia. One under James Longstreet, one under Jackson. When Jackson died, Lee decided to create 3 corps. One remained under James Longstreet. The other 2 corps were under new corps commanders. They were division commanders promoted to corps command. So this was the first time that they went into battle where 2/3 of Lee's army was being commanded by men who had no experience in managing that number of troops. In each corps, whether it be Union or Confederate, there would be 3 divisions in each, of which there is usually 4 brigades, sometimes 5. Occasionally there would be 3 brigades. Earlier in the war, many divisions had 3 brigades because the brigades were so numerous. Casualties and death by disease had weakened each army by that time. 4 to 6 regiments each in a brigade with 10 companies in a regiment. So if you figure there's 10 companies in a regiment of 100 men each, you got 1,000 men per regiment. By the time the Battle of Gettysburg occurred, if a regiment had 400 men that could answer muster and go into battle, they were considered fat. They were considered to be very heavy with firepower. Many regiments in Lee's army could barely muster 200 men by the time Gettysburg occurred. What happened after Gettysburg? What were the results? Well, certainly Lee retreated after an ignominious defeat. He suffered 3,005, and these are the numbers on the Confederate side are approximations. Many of their reports were lost in 1865. Many of these records were burned when Richmond was evacuated. 18,000 wounded, 6,500 captured and missing. In Meade's Army of the Potomac, 3,155 killed, 14,500 and change wounded, and approximately 5,400 captured or missing. 51,000 plus casualties on American soil in 3 days. So that certainly doesn't diminish recent happenings, but it just gives you a snapshot of what warfare was like in the mid-19th century. And keep in mind, although Gettysburg, the Battle of Gettysburg had the largest number of casualties of any engagement in the Civil War. The bloodiest day in the Civil War was September 17, 1862, the Battle of Antietam, where there were over 23,000 casualties in just one single day. And again, Gettysburg followed Chancellorsville, where over that 4 days, approximately 25,000 casualties occurred. So this was happening like every other month. We were seeing casualties like this. So, any questions?